भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तन्न विदुः सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः।
Om Gurubhyo Namaha. We continue with Chapter 4, Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the Yoga of Knowledge of Renunciation of Action. Yesterday we finished up to verse number 37, and today we'll start verse number 38, and this is the essence of Maharishiji's commentary, translation and commentary on Bhagavad Gita. We saw in verse number 37, Bhagavan has given the knowledge, and he says the fire of knowledge turns all actions into ashes. The essence of this verse is that once knowledge has been gained, then all actions come to an end. So once this knowledge is gained, then all actions feel fulfilled. So when one attains this knowledge, then all activity, mental and physical, is carried out under the direct influence of the forces of nature. So again, when this knowledge is gained, then the doer finds himself not involved with the action, or else the action that is performed ceases to be. It ceases to engage the consciousness of the actor. So here, when the fire of knowledge turns all actions into ashes, then this puts an end to the cycle of cause and effect in the field of action, and this in turn puts an end to the cycle of birth and death, and which in turn brings eternal freedom to life, Jivan Mukta. Now here is verse number 38. Nahi jnanena sadrusham pavitramiha vidyate tatsvayam yoga samsiddhaha kalenatmani vindati. Now the English translation is, truly there is in this world nothing so purifying as knowledge. He who is perfected in yoga of himself in time finds this within himself. I repeat again. Truly, there is in this world nothing so purifying as knowledge. And he who is perfected in yoga of himself in time finds this within himself. Now here, in this sloka or the verse, there are three phrases. The first phrase is, truly there is in this world nothing so purifying as knowledge. Then the second phrase is, he who is perfected in yoga. And the third phrase is, of himself in time finds this within himself. Now let's start with the first phrase, nothing so purifying as knowledge. So here Bhagavan Krishna is saying, truly there is in this world nothing so purifying as knowledge. So here the primary work of a purifier is first to purify the different ingredients or components, and then having freed the components from impurities, to present the whole compound in its pure state. Now, how is this purification brought about? We understand that knowledge is the purifier of life. And this knowledge purifies life in the sense that it analyzes the different aspects of existence. And not only it analyzes the different aspects of existence, but also distinguishes and separates the eternal aspects from the transient. So, first it analyzes the different aspects. Next, it discriminates between the eternal and the transient. So, it acts like a filter to clear the mud from muddy water. This crystal water of life has been polluted by becoming mixed with the activities of the three gunas. But in reality, the real nature of life is absolute bliss consciousness. So because of the activities of these three gunas, there is masking of the eternity of life behind these transient and ever-changing aspects. So first we have seen how knowledge purifies life. Now let us see at how this pure state of knowledge is being realized. The pure state of being is realized by knowing the relative and the absolute components of life. So in order to know the pure state of being, then one has to know both the relative and the absolute components of life. And this knowing comes to perfection when the knower gains perfect intimacy with being. So he first realizes the being and then becomes fully aware of the basic activity of life, the activities of the three gunas as separate from being. Now, how does one attain this perfect intimacy? We have discussed this earlier. Here, the perfect intimacy with being is gained when the mind gains the transcendental state of consciousness. And this is the absolute state of knowledge, which can be described as the state of knowingness. So when one attains perfect knowledge, then one arrives at the state of knowingness and brings life to perfect purity. So in this way, knowledge removes ignorance. which is the greatest impurity of life, and then takes life out of the cycle of birth, death, and suffering. Now let us try to understand this knowledge further. Try to understand this carefully. The superficial aspect of knowledge is knowing and understanding. Again, the superficial aspect of knowledge is knowing and understanding, and the real nature of knowledge is the state of knowingness, knowing the self. And again, this state of knowingness is the state of pure consciousness or being. So now we understand that transcendental consciousness represents the real nature of knowledge. So now we have seen the superficial aspect of knowledge, then we have seen the transcendental consciousness, which is the real nature of the knowledge, and then we go into the third aspect of this knowledge, where transcendental consciousness coexists with the activity of the waking state of consciousness. So here in this state, the transcendental consciousness becomes permanently established in the very nature of the mind, and the absolute and relative phases of life begin to be appreciated simultaneously. Again, the self here is experienced as separate from activity. Now, there is yet another state of knowledge in which the separateness of the self and activity dissolves into the unity of God consciousness. And this is the most purified state of life and free from any stain of impurity. So such a life in absolute purity represents the supreme state of knowledge, and Bhagavan says, he who is perfected in yoga of himself, in time finds this within himself. So this is the second phrase. Again, let me read the whole verse again. Truly there is in this world nothing so purifying as knowledge. He who is perfected in yoga of himself, in time finds this within himself. Let us expand this phrase further. He who is perfected in yoga of himself, in time finds this within himself. So here, through the practice of transcendental meditation, one gains the pure consciousness and rises finally to God consciousness, and then one can live with absolute purity in the daily life. So when this state of yoga, which is the state of transcendental consciousness, becomes permanent, then it maintains itself throughout all activity. So when the self is maintained throughout all activity, then one has reached the state of cosmic consciousness. Here it's important to understand this perfect infusion of the absolute into relativity takes place by degrees. And how does it take place by degrees? Through the regular practice of going to the transcendent and coming back to the field of action in daily life. So there is a balanced alternation of meditation and activity, meditation and activity. And Maharishiji here gives one analogy which makes this clear. For example, we dip a white cloth in a yellow dye and let it remain in the dye to be colored for a few minutes. Then we take it out and expose it to the sun till the color begins to fade. Now we repeat the same process, again putting the cloth into the sunlight till the color fades. So in the same way, We meditate for about half an hour, and following this, by coming out into the practical life, we work for 8 to 10 hours, and by which time we begin to feel that we are out of the influence of the morning meditation. Then we meditate again in the same way, and again let the influence fade by coming out into practical life. So we keep repeating this process of gaining the state of universal being in transcendence or samadhi during meditation, and then coming out to regain individuality in the field of relative existence. So by repeatedly doing the meditation and followed by activity, then this allows more and more infusion of being into the nature of the mind, even when it is engaged in activity through the senses. Further, when the full infusion of being has been accomplished into the relative, then the state of cosmic consciousness has been gained. Here, this state of cosmic consciousness provides the basis for the development of the state of perfected yoga in God consciousness. So now let us see what does it take to go from cosmic consciousness into God consciousness. This development of cosmic consciousness into God consciousness requires that the separation found to exist between the self and activity be transformed to a fusion of these two separate identities. And when this fusion of these two separate identities happens, then this results in the eternal unity of God consciousness. Now, let us see how this transformation really comes about. The transformation of the state of separation takes place by virtue of the most refined activity of all. And what is this refined activity of all? It is the activity of devotion to God. So we understand now that this transformation to the unity of God consciousness comes through the activity of devotion to God, which is the most refined activity. Now, let us look at this further. If we examine closely, then we see that in cosmic consciousness, the self is experienced as separate from activity. Further, the eternal silence of transcendental consciousness becomes compatible with the incessant activity of the waking state of consciousness. Now, when we look at the physiology and the nervous system, then we see that one experiences a slowing down of the metabolism during the inward stroke of meditation, and the nervous system comes to a state of restful alertness when the mind gains transcendental consciousness. So here the mind gains the restful alertness during the phase of transcendental consciousness, and then the same nervous system becomes active when it engages itself in the activity of thought. So here it's important to understand how the nervous system is transforming. The nervous system comes to a state of restful alertness during the transcendental consciousness, and then the same nervous system becomes active again when it engages itself in activity. So here what we are seeing is that this nervous system is different in different states of consciousness. So, in transcendental consciousness, there is a certain specific state of the nervous system, and again in the waking state of consciousness, the state of the nervous system will be different. Now again, when we look at the cosmic consciousness and we see that the self and the activity are separate, then it is necessary that the two states of the nervous system correspond to these two states of consciousness. That is the waking state of consciousness and then the transcendental consciousness of the being. So again here, one state of consciousness is passing to the other alternately. The mind is gaining alternately transcendental consciousness and then the waking state of consciousness passing from one to the other. So this gradual and systematic culture of the physical nervous system creates a physiological situation in which the two states of consciousness exist together simultaneously. Now let us take this a step further. It is very well known that there exists in the nervous system many autonomous levels of function. Here we are referring to this as sympathetic and parasympathetic, and between these two there is a lot of coordination happens, and that's why we say autonomic nervous system. But what's happening in the cosmic consciousness is two different levels of organization in the nervous system are functioning simultaneously while maintaining their separate identities. So here, by virtue of this anatomical separation of function, it still becomes possible for transcendental consciousness to exist with the waking state of consciousness and also with the dreaming and sleeping states of consciousness. Now here, let's take a step back and just see what happens in the early stages of the practice of transcendental meditation. So here, in the early stages of practicing, the two levels of function in the nervous system are unable to occur at the same time. They are not cultured to occur at the same time. The function of one inhibits the function of the other. In essence, we can say when the sympathetic is predominant, then the parasympathetic is quiet. When the parasympathetic is acting, the sympathetic is quiet. And this is why at this stage, either transcendental consciousness or the waking state of consciousness is experienced. But continuing the practice of transcendental meditation and experiencing the transcendent, then the mind is passing from one to another and gradually overcomes this physiological inhibition. Then the two levels begin to function perfectly at the same time without inhibiting each other and still maintaining their separate identities. So here the two maintain their separate identity, but the function of each is independent of the other, and that is why this state of the nervous system corresponds to cosmic consciousness. So here self-awareness exists as separate from activity. Silence is experienced with activity and yet as separate from it. Now let us move further on attaining the God consciousness. So in order to develop this cosmic consciousness to God consciousness, then the same nervous system needs to be cultured further so that these two levels, which function independently, come to function in an integrated manner. So when the nervous system is further cultured, then this gives rise to a state of consciousness in which the sense of separation between the self and the activity is dissolved. And then this duality constituting cosmic consciousness is subsumed into the unity of God consciousness. So up to now we have seen how the culturing of the nervous system is happening and how the consciousness is rising to God consciousness, and from cosmic consciousness to God consciousness what is needed is the finest and most refined activity of devotion. Now let us see what is happening at the physiological level. The integration of functions on the physiological level is brought about by a mental activity of ultimate refinement. So let us try to analyze this further. That means we are trying to understand the whole range of activity. The activity of the organs of action is the most gross. Then the activity of the senses of perception is more refined. Further, the mental activity of thought is finer still. And then the activity of feeling and emotion is the finest of all. In addition, one could further classify different levels of quality in emotional activity, such as anger, fear, despair, happiness, reverence, service, and love. So here, the activity of devotion, which we have been speaking about, comprises the feelings of service, reverence, and love. And these are the most refined qualities of feeling. And it is through this activity of devotion that cosmic consciousness develops into God consciousness. Now listen carefully and try to understand this. When the nervous system is constantly exposed to this most refined activity of devotion, where we said there is the feelings of service, reverence, and love, the physiological integration of functions that have been described take place. So here there is the integration of the mental activity of ultimate refinement, and it is the permanent state of this condition of the nervous system that enables a man to live God consciousness in his daily life. So here a person who is in God consciousness, though acting in the midst of all sorts of circumstances, he fulfills the purpose of cosmic life. He carries the totality of existence within himself, and he moves in the unity of God. Now, again, to develop God consciousness, which represents the supreme state of knowledge, it is necessary to culture the physical nervous system. And how does this happen? This requires regular and sustained practice, which obviously needs time. So again, Bhagavan is saying, this requires regular and sustained practice, which obviously needs time, and that is why he is saying, in time finds within himself. Let me read this verse again. Truly there is in this world nothing so purifying as knowledge. He who is perfected in yoga, of himself in time finds this within himself. So here when Bhagavan says within himself, then it is clearly understood that the supreme state of knowledge is not gained from outside, and it is gained within oneself, And how is this gained? After one has lived for some time the perfected state of yoga in God consciousness. So one has to live for some time this perfected state of yoga in God consciousness. So here the element of time indicates that during the early stages of God consciousness, life is full of such overwhelming experience of unity in diversity that one lives deeply lost in it. Again, during the early stages of God consciousness, there is this overwhelming experience of unity in diversity, and one lives deeply lost in this God. Gradually, as time passes, one begins to appreciate this unity in terms of other things and activities in the world. Again, as time passes, one appreciates this unity, that means this divinity or the union with the divine, in terms of other things and activities in the world. It is then that one has realized God and one has the knowledge of God. So again, when one says, I see this divinity in others, I feel this divinity in others, I see this divinity in the world, in everything, or this God particle everywhere, this is when one sees it. This is the appreciation of this unity with God in terms of other things and activities in the world. And again, this is termed as the realization of God, and one has the knowledge of God. Now it becomes clear why Bhagavan speaks of the necessity for time in gaining supreme knowledge. When he says, in time finds within himself. Let me read this verse again, finally. Truly, there is in this world nothing so purifying as knowledge. He who is perfected in yoga of himself, in time finds this within himself. So I will end here. This is a very beautiful knowledge. You have to listen to it more than once and maybe several times to grasp the complete knowledge. And so we'll continue tomorrow. Here ends verse number 38, chapter 4, Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, of renunciation of action, the essence of Maharishi's translation and commentary of Bhagavad Gita. Jai Gurudev, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu.